Hello, Cancer Warriors. My name is Tonya, and welcome to Power of Pantaloons podcast. Today we have Sarah Ty with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. So, why don't you let the audience know what it is that is your zone of genius?
Yeah, so my gifts are a little bit more unique, I think. I am an intuitive tarot reader slash spiritual guide. And while most people hear tarot and they think predictive readings and they probably even think Hollywood and things like that, what I do is a lot more grounding. And really, I don't even focus on the future a whole lot. It's kind of like this is energetically where you might head, but I don't feel the future set in stone. So a lot of what I do is really helping you work through the now. And so the information that comes through is invitations of what you can work on, what blocks, traumas, things you need to work through. And even just reminding you that you have your own strengths to bring to the table. So it's a lot of really reconnecting you with your own higher self and inner guide.
So, basically, you use it as a tool to do your inner works.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also wanted to point out too, I don't take credit for the things that come through. I am like a channel. So it's me and your higher power, whichever higher power you believe in. I truly believe that when we
I,
sit down with the intention of a reading, it's your higher power or your higher self speaking through me and through the cards.
I also read tarot, and I 1,000% tell everybody is you need to take notes if you'd like to record this, because after the session is done, if you ask me a question, I will look at you like you are speaking Japanese because I will not have any idea, because it's none of my business. So you need to ask all your questions during the session because I will have no memory of this place.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. There are some regulars that I have that I've seen them enough that I've like, oh, didn't this come up last time? But it's not something that I retain or remember because, again, like you said, it's not for me, it's for them. Just as
Right.
like the times where readings come through and I'm like, that makes no sense to me at all. But I don't, it's not for me to figure out. So in that moment, I just start talking and it usually lands with the other person.
Yes, that is what I find too, which is why it's such a beautiful tool. And right before we started, we had a little chat, and one of the things that we were talking about is using it to help you in the now and help you work through issues, right? Like whatever they may be, whether you're going through a cancer journey or you have some other trauma or it's a Tuesday, whatever, right? Like
Those darn Tuesdays.
they can be rough sometimes.
I have a friend that literally will, she has a thing against Tuesdays. And so if she has a bad day, she will literally be like, well, it's a Tuesday. I would expect nothing less. It cracks me up.
Funny that I picked that random day.
Yeah.
So tell me more about tell me more. Just tell me more. Like I don't even know where to start.
Well, I could always start with kind of how I found tarot and share the backstory with that.
Yeah,
So,
let's uh,
yeah, cool. So, I started reading tarot back in high school. I grew up very Christian, and it was around my teen years that I started asking the bigger questions. Things just didn't add up for me personally. And so I was trying to figure out, well, if it's not Christianity, then what is it? And so of course I went to the exact opposite, polar opposite of what I was raised in, because naturally that's what you do most of the time. For at least an angsty teenager, that was what I did. And so I chose tarot, and at first it was just kind of a cool thing. It was like, oh, look at me, I have tarot cards. And I'd read for my friends and read for myself. And then as I grew up into adulthood, I always had a deck on hand. But for most of the years, it was kind of just something cool to have and bring out every now and again. It didn't have any, I didn't see the medicinal side to it yet. It was just something fun and different and spooky and all that. And then about 7, 8 years ago, I was in this situation where I wasn't sure if I needed to leave my daughter's dad or not. He had his own demons. It was very toxic. It was starting to become abusive. And I was really struggling with like if I should stay or go, because I was a single mom. I'm not sorry, I was a stay-at-home mom who didn't have any income. The idea of leaving, I had nowhere to go. So I pulled out my cards. It was the first time I turned to my deck for a actual purpose beyond like just pulling it out for fun. And the reading was so resonant and so relevant. And like it was exactly what I needed to hear. And of all the 78 cards, the ones that I got were so like direct. If you stay, it's not going to get better. If you leave, you can have a new opportunity to grow and start a new life. It was just so black and white. And so after that, I started actually using my cards just personally during different things, asking about big decisions and, oh, I'm meeting this guy. Is he safe? Just asking whatever it is that I felt like I needed to. And I started realizing though that the cards were always on point. They were not just on point, they were consistent. The messaging, if it was the same question or the same scenario, cards would not necessarily be the same, but the message overall would be the same. And so I started kind of taking note of that. And so again, it just became like a personal journey and something I leaned on for myself. And then in 2020, when the world shut down, I think many of us wondered what we were doing with our life. And that was me. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was feeling, and I never actually had a spirituality either. I don't know if you can hear my cat or not, but that's my cat.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. I didn't have a spirituality in place because ever since I left Christianity, I just was agnostic. I didn't have like a belief system. And so 2020 really got me into figuring out like, what do I believe? And through that, I learned about shadow work. I learned about inner child healing. I learned about digging deep and figuring out all the insecurities and all the things that were keeping me from being myself. And so it just started this huge healing journey. And through that, I was kind of trying to figure out like, well, what's my purpose? Now that I kind of have a spirituality and a belief system, I want to know what I'm supposed to be doing more with my life. And tarot was the one thing that kept coming to me. And it was also the one thing that I kept saying no to.
That's first of all, there's a couple things that you just said in there that I think are super important. Using as a healing tool, medicinal. Like I thought that's an excellent way to put it. Everybody thinks that it's just for party tricks, and it really can be a tool that you can use for insight into yourself and or others if you're reading for others. And one of the things that we like to talk about here, is healing and the mind, body, spirit, right? So this really helps you not just with the spiritual side, but working on the internal stuff. We're we're here to to live through stuff, experience stuff, and to heal, right? Like when we don't how do I want to phrase this? When we encounter traumas, um, we're not supposed to hold on to them forever. We're supposed to work through them and release them and grow as individuals. And sometimes we have a real hard time with that. And sometimes that dis-ease in our body turns into disease, right? So I think it is, which everybody's like, why do you have a tarot reader on? But that right there is why, because it's a tool, just like crystals can be a tool, and your chakra stones, your singing bowls, all of these beautiful like alternative wellness modalities. Like this is fun. Um, so I wanted to touch on those points.
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned the medicinal term listening to Lindsay Mack. She's another podcaster who teaches tarot and does courses and all. And that's actually where I took my course from when I decided to really go in and learn tarot. And one thing that she says that I love to repeat and share because I think it's so on point. And you have people who don't know much about tarot, but they tend to think that there's good and bad cards. And I think that's fair because of Hollywood, right? They pull out the death card or the devil card, and you automatically think, well, there's got to be some bad cards in there, right? And so what she teaches, and what I've been teaching as well, is there are no bad cards. They're all medicine. Some are just more bittersweet than others, but they're all medicine. They all come with information and messages to help you grow, to help you heal. And what I love about tarot too is it doesn't mince words. It's very direct. So yeah. And so what I've had so many people tell me is it's like still, and I've heard the same phrasing over and over. It's like you shined a light on the thing that I needed to hear the most, that I've either been avoiding or hiding from, or not really wanting to acknowledge, or maybe not even knowing what to do with it. So it really pinpoints and gets it like it drives home what you need to know, and it kind of gets rid of all the fluff.
I think that some decks are spicier than others. Some of them are more, very gentle in the way that they talk to you, and some of them are absolutely brutal in the way they talk to you. And
Yeah.
and especially if you keep asking the same things, like the tarot cards will be like, excuse me, ma'am, we've had this discussion. We're not doing it again.
Yeah. There was one time, I think it was like a year ago, and I was just like, what's my purpose? Am I doing this right? Am I doing the right work? Like, I just felt like really like I need help. And it felt sarcastic. The answer was almost like, well, what do you think? What's the work you're doing? What do you think it just kind of felt like, ooh, okay, I hear you. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It gets really to the heart of the matter. And I think that that's why it's so special, is because so when people get readings, most of the time, if they haven't had a reading before, they tend to think it's something really woo-woo and mysterious. And they're expecting me to tell them something. Usually it's more like, tell me something I don't know. But what ends up happening is I tell them everything that I shouldn't know, but they already know. And so that's where they get that confirmation and validation.
Yeah.
And what happens though is that um, they 9 times out of 10, or actually, no, let me rephrase that, 10 times out of 10, they already know the answer. I've
Yeah.
heard it time and time again. I already knew that, or that's kind of already what I was thinking, or what you said was literally something that I was thinking in my mind about. And so it's not unknown to them. It's not mysterious. It ends up just being like, oh, I was already thinking that. That makes sense to me. I just didn't know if it was the right way to go. And so all they end up really getting from me is the validation and confirmation that they were right all along.
Yep. Absolutely. I think the 9 out of 10 are the ones that are willing to admit it out loud. The other one is like, I knew that, but I'm not saying nothing.
True, true. I don't come across them very often. Usually that's like if I do events, because I do events at like parties and like corporate parties and whatever. And those are really fun because I get to sit with most people who've never had a reading before, and I get to kind of watch their mind gets blown, their minds blown and open up, and it's so cool. But there are the few that sit down with me, and they're usually like,
Yeah, they come in hostile.
and I mean, granted, I haven't had a lot of hostility, but I do get a lot of like, so am I going to win the lottery?
That's not
you
what
know?
this is about.
Yes. And so with them, 9 times out of 10, with them, when I do readings, they'll just be like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. And I just think, I say, well, I don't resonate with everyone. Thank you for your time, and it's fine. But it's so funny. I actually had, and it's usually men, although I've seen a lot more men being open-minded around tarot. It's been a really cool experience actually seeing guys coming in with these like, oh, let me ask questions about myself and my growth. And I'm like, yes. Other times I'll have men sit down with me who are just like, I don't understand it. But there was like 2 or 3 men that sat down with me at events that just cracked me up because I shared their reading with them, and then I always ask, like, does that resonate? Especially if I'm not getting any feedback. And that there was 3 different times where the guys were like, I don't really understand it, but then they like left me a $20 tip. And I'm like, well, something must have resonated. If you maybe you just don't want to talk about it, maybe because I otherwise why would you leave me such a big tip if it didn't really make sense? So I think that sometimes it's also not being able to, like you said, admit it or talk about it.
Yeah, and and that's part of their healing journey, right? Like, some people have a much harder time opening up, but also you're a complete stranger, right? Like, they might take all the tidbits you gave them to the person they talk to, and then just be like blah, and then work with that individual or individuals as opposed to you, which
Yeah.
is you know totally fine, right? Like, you were
Yeah.
the key to helping them unlock that closet they need to go through.
Exactly. Like I've had many people tell me, wow, this was like a mini therapy session. And I'm always so quick to say, no, 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 no. This was not a therapy session. This is teaching you what you can take to therapy. This is probably giving you the ideas that you haven't worked on and should work with a professional with. But this is just insight and it doesn't come from me. So you need to take, if you feel that you need therapy, take it to a professional. This is
Yeah,
not therapy.
yes, absolutely. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeking out professionals.
Not at all.
The stigma in society over mental health is garbage. Like we all transition through rough spots for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons. There's so many reasons, especially in this post-apocalyptic hellscape we find ourselves in right now. Like it's so like if you had told me 10 years ago that that's what we would be living in, I would have told you like stop with the sci-fi, put the book back on the show. Like it just seems so weird, you
Yeah.
know.
So, um, I was gonna say, oh yeah. So I am a big advocate of therapy. I definitely feel like everyone should get therapy at some point or another because even if you don't have what they call big T trauma, everyone has little T trauma. Everyone
Yes.
has negative self-talk. Everyone has negative narratives that they've picked up and carried along the years that they need to talk through and work through in order to reach their best selves. But also a lot of people have big T trauma that they don't know how to unlock or talk about, and then it ends up impacting their daily lives and they might not even be conscious of it. So I'm definitely a huge advocate of therapy. And then it's so funny as far as what you're talking about with the landscape right now. Um, yes, it does kind of feel post-apocalyptic, but I feel like the energy is it's uprooting all the things that needs to go, all the things that need to change. And so what comes with that, it feels very, you read tarot, so it feels very tower moment to me. Like everything
Well, it
happens.
is. It,
Yeah.
it it is. I like the transition into the age of Aquarius where we're going to be more enlightened. We do have to, as a society, do societal shadow work and root out all the garbage that's there. And I don't want to go into a political not right, like so we but yes, like so many more light workers, so many alternative healing practitioners are really starting to be present and step into those shoes because the world really needs the light right now in a
Yeah.
big way. So more people are stepping into being light workers.
Yeah. And then more of the shadow side of like healthcare and education and law enforcement, like all the shadow sides of those are coming up. And it's so that way, like you said, as a society, we can clear it out. So that's why it feels very confrontational, but that's what the tower is about. The tower is like things have got to go. Otherwise
Yes.
it's a collapse. So we have to get it all cleared out. It's that way we can rebuild the
Yes.
foundation.
Yeah.
So I feel like, as difficult as 2020 was, I really feel like it was necessary. And I really feel like it's taking us to where we need to be now.
I openly weep for the struggles of a lot of people right now, all over the globe, and it's so hard to watch. Yeah, but sometimes we just have to bear witness and obviously, do what we can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's the key is it's not getting caught up in all the negative because it's really easy to do that right now. I've stopped really delving into the news probably in the last few months because it just was so depressing. And I'm an empath, so I'm like soaking it all in. And so I really try to stay away from that now. And I'd like to shift more on like, okay, what impact can I make today? What impact
Yes.
can I do that, one that will, because I feel like when you're living your life's mission, you're doing what lights you up. So you're already doing something that you enjoy. So that brings you joy, that keeps you in a high vibing state, but then also you're giving back. So that's also very rewarding. And so I really think that that's really where we can get our most empowerment right now is what can I do to help? And it could be in so many different ways. You could be a painter and you could be painting your, you know, how expressing your feelings through a painting and then selling it. And that painting could be an inspiration for someone else. You know what I mean? There's so many different ways that you can do that in the world, but I think really focusing on what lights you up and what gives back is a great way to combat all that negative energy right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, watching the news is very stressful, and stress leads to disease. I I I moved the TV out of our living room, so now we have a sitting room, um, a decade ago
Wow.
because of I don't, for a very long time I was like, the news is all it does is depress me. There's no feel good stories at all. It's all just sensational stuff, and it's just, and I can't at all, as an empath, cannot tolerate that. So just nipped it out. I get my news on TikTok now.
Yeah, mine's Facebook. Although it did just let me know that apparently they're taking away the news. So that could be a good thing. I kind of figured, you know what, if you're going to remove the news from me, it's because I obviously don't need it. That's all. I'll stick with the big
Yes.
things I need to know about. But beyond that, you know, it's more about love and light.
So let's talk about how to use the tarot as to build your intuition, right? Like, because for me, the reason I'm still here is because my body was talking to me, and I listened because I had developed a relationship like with my intuition. So I think that that is critical for people now, especially now, because of what we just talked about. So how do we build our intuition with the tarot?
Yeah. So, when it comes to intuition, we all have it. We all have intuition. We all have those psychic abilities. We're not always in tune with it, or we are, but we don't listen and we tend to drown it out. And it's because society doesn't teach us to trust ourselves. It teaches us to look for help elsewhere. And the thing is, we're the ones that are the experts of what feelings we have in our body. And so with tarot, what tarot allows us to do is, if we, let's say that we need guidance in something, whether it's, you know, our health, um, now personally, just putting this out there, I don't do health readings. I can do energetic health readings where this is what you need to know around your health. But like, I've had people wanting me to like help them diagnose, and I'm like, no, 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 don't do that.
Nope.
But you can still ask questions around your health. Like, what do I need to know around my health, for instance? And what tends to happen is, when you're reading, well, for instance, if you don't know anything about tarot, and so you have like your little booklet, because usually if you buy a tarot deck, you'll get a little book with like the basic meanings. Because that's how I started. I read that way for years, and Google. I use the two of those together. Sometimes there's a lot of information for one card, and it's different information. It's not always like the same information. And so what I would say is the first thing is read about the cards, and then feel which one makes the most sense to you. And like, especially that goes with your question, that goes with what you're already kind of thinking. Now, this is not the same thing as wanting to see what you want to see, because that could be, there's that fine line of like you wanting it to be a certain outcome. So you're like, oh, that sounds really good. I want it to be that. It's more like you'll have a deep knowing of, okay, that feels right.
Yeah, yeah, like it just sinks in, it sits correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it could, I mean, sometimes if it's a positive thing, it's like, okay, no, that feels good. But other times it's that thinking, you don't even really want to totally admit to it, but you're like, that's the one.
Yeah, that
And
stinky one right there.
yeah, and that happens a lot with tarot, but it's just because it's, like I said, it's medicine. So it's either bittersweet. If you think about like when you have to take medicine as like a little kid, we love the Flintstone vitamins and those tasty ones, right? But then sometimes we have to get medicine that's like, you want to drink something immediately after because it just doesn't taste very good. It's that same idea. It's the sweeter ones are the ones that are more like uplifting and like encouraging. And then the other ones are uplifting, encouraging in their own right, but it's more like you have to do some soul searching around it. You have to really, there's usually an invitation to do something with it. Like the tower, for instance, whenever that comes up, the invitation is, hey, look, something's got to give. If
Yeah.
nothing changes, then this catastrophe, this chaotic environment is going to pursue. And if you want
Yeah.
this to go, you need to go through and excavate what's rotting in the foundation in order to get rid of it and rebuild.
Yep.
And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. Like that could be a toxic relationship. That could be a toxic work environment. That could be a toxic living environment. That could be limiting beliefs that you have just swirling in your mind every single day.
Yeah.
And the different cards will give you the clues as to what that is. Although I will tell you 9 times out of 10, when I tell people about the tower, they already know. They don't even have to tell me. They just tell me, oh, I know what that is. So usually when the
Yep.
tower comes up, it's like you already know this thing isn't good for you. And if you don't know, the way that you do know, the way that you can learn that is every time you get ahead, this thing knocks you back down. And that's if there's a consistency of every time you feel good about yourself, something happens, it knocks you back down. Take a look at what it is that's knocking you back down, because that's likely what it is that's got to go.
Yes, absolutely. So the importance of keeping a journal while you like I feel that like especially if this is a new tool for you, right? Like if you've never done readings before, get a simple deck, don't read reverse cards, just read them direct and don't stress yourself out over it. Go by what the booklet is telling you in the beginning, but if you pull a card and you feel like there's this thing about it, put that in. So like you could create your own associations with the cards, right? Like, you know, for me, like the star card represents my sister just because of who she's always been for me. So anytime that comes up in a reading, it isn't necessarily star energy. It could very well just be my sister. So that's the relationship I've started building with my deck. So do that with yourself, but writing it all down, absolutely imperative. You can buy your own deck. You don't have to have somebody give you one. That's nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
I've heard
people
that
give them
before.
to you, take them, right? Like you'll end up with like 400 decks like I have, but not 400, but many. And different decks will have different energies, right? And you will resonate more strongly with some. So you want to look for that when you're choosing your deck. The where your hands are going when you pick them up and you feel like good, that's probably a good match. But like some of them are not so good matches, but you know immediately. You really do.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's my first deck. I had the same one for like 10 years. It was very whimsical and like fantasy based. And at the time was how I kind of saw tarot. So it just worked. Now the cards I use are more I have two other decks, and one of them is more progressive, and I love because there's different color in there. Like there's different you know, it feels very acceptance of like everybody. And then my most recent deck, I picked it out because it was so colorful and vibrant and kind of very like Alice in Wonderly, but like it just I choose that one for events specifically because most people have never seen a tarot deck before, and I don't want to scare them away with some of the pictures, But yeah, it's super important to pick up a deck that calls to you. And then I love how you mentioned making sure, well, first of all, the journaling is a great tool because that way you can actually see. So like, and it depends on what works for you, because some people are really great journalers. I am not. I am trying to be, but yeah, it's just you have to go with what works for you. So for me, I just happen to pay attention to, oh, wasn't that in my reading last time? I just happen to kind of follow it that way. But if journaling is how you process, then it's a great way to, if you did a tarot reading every week and you went back to the beginning of the month and reread each reading, you might be surprised by the theme that continues to show up. So that's a good way to, again, kind of trust your intuition, because most of the time you already know the answer. It's more like confirming it for you. And when you see the same confirmation over and over and over, it helps
Yep.
you not only trust the cards, and I wouldn't even say trust the cards, because I do see the cards as a tool. It's not like they're all magical. It's the intention. You're using the cards as a way to connect with your higher power. So you're setting into that intention. And so through that, you're able to trust that higher power, which is ultimately
And
yourself.
yourself. And
Yes, that's,
yourself.
yeah. When I say higher power, it's like higher self. It could be.
Yes.
I think it's
Both.
kind of one and the same, but
Yep.
in a way. But yeah, it's you start to trust that not only you can have like a spiritual thing to lean on, but like I said, you already know the answer, so you're able to see how well your answer correlates with this over here, and trust that inner uh,
Knowing.
knowing. Thank you. And then the other thing I want to mention is I really loved how you even encouraged them to go with, if a certain card has a different meaning for them, you don't have to follow the basic meanings. It is good to have, you know, a basic understanding of each card to a point, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional way. And that's how
Yeah.
I read.
Yeah.
So I want to say most of my cards, it has like a basis in the original, but not all of them do. Like for me, I don't read the suits, the like the kings and the queens and whatever. A lot of readers will read that as like a personification of somebody, but I don't. I take the energies around it and focus more on the energies. And not only that, but there are several times in a reading where a card that I would normally read a certain way will talk to me totally differently. And the first time that happened, I didn't know what to do with it because I felt kind of like a fraud for saying a different thing than what I would normally say, but it made sense to the person. So I've just started learning like, oh, it's talking to me differently. That's okay. It's meant to.
Yeah. Sometimes when you flip over the card you've looked at 1,000 times, you see something different.
Mhm.
The imagery just appears different. Like there's a new booper in the card that you have literally never seen before, and it's there for that one person, and then it disappears again. Like that is a thing. That is a valid thing that happens, and just go with it, right? Like they are a tool, but they're based on your inner knowing. So you will see what you're meant to see. That's just how that works.
Yeah. You just need to be open to what's coming through. And that's, I think, coming back to the bittersweet medicine that could be there, that could be hard if you're not ready to see some of the shadow work that's in there.
Yeah.
Um, but knowing that the shadow work that's coming up and the bittersweet medicinal messages that are coming up, it's all for you. I think that's helpful when you know that all the cards and the intuition and the intention, all of it is here to help you grow, to help you get to your better
Yes.
side. That's it. There's no meanness in it. There's no cruelty in it. It's all like, hey, we want to see you reach your best potential. And this is the invitations on how to get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with most of my tarot decks, I don't even read the reverses. There's one, and it's called Revelations, and it's actually the two sides, right? Like
Oh,
if you flip it over this way, it looks one way, but if it's a cool deck. It's very cool, but I don't use that one all the time, and I just prefer not to use reversals because one of my earlier teachers was like, "There's enough nonsense in there. Like, why do you have to memorize it twice?" Like, and I'm like, and it resonated with me, right? But that might not resonate with you. So just a little bit at a time, and just
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all about like your intuition and what feels right to you and the message and how it speaks to you, which is going to be different for everybody. You know, like so for you, you don't read reversals. There's many readers that don't read reversals. I personally do, but for me, it's so funny because kind of a funny backstory, but up until so I started my business and doing this professionally in the beginning of 2021. And I took this course from Lindsay Mack in the beginning of 2021 before I went professional. And up until that point, I was still reading my book. I was still Googling because I just couldn't memorize all these things. It just wasn't sticking. I did this one course with Lindsay Mack, and the way that she described it, I literally memorized all those cards in one day. And of course, since then, they've just kind of evolved into what they are now. But the way that the reversals, it wasn't even exactly like memorizing a whole new thing for the way that I read reversals. Sometimes it speaks to awareness around the thing, like, you know, this is something that you're struggling with, but I see that you're working on it. There's an awareness here. Or sometimes it means resistance and they're like not wanting to deal with it. And so there's some, but then there are people who read reversals where they literally read like a whole new meaning behind it. So it really depends on what works and resonates for you. For me, I love reversals because to me, it's like, oh, just a little bit more information than I had before. I don't need to read reversals. There are times where it shows up right and I already know it means reversed. It just comes to me, you know? But to make it simple for those that don't know and they're just learning, I think that adding reversals could be confusing. And so
yes.
definitely starting with it upright is a good idea. And then play with it after that. Maybe you want to do reversals. Maybe
Yep.
you don't. You know, it's whatever works for you.
Yeah. But circling back to the journal though, you can create a tarot journal where you just for each card you write your interpretations of it, and the meaning of what in the booklet will shift to how you read it because that's how it's meant for you to read. Like
Yeah.
I didn't memorize all of them. I was like, please listen, with the chemo brain, are you out of your mind, right? Like not that I started tarot after that, but I've been reading for a very long time. But it really is just, you know, and this is just helping you see the things that you need to work on. And it's part of your healing journey, is working your shadow work or your inner work, or how whatever you want to term it,
Yeah.
the the emotional stuff, the things that you just need to work through.
And one thing that's cool about tarot, like I said, it doesn't give you fluff. It gets really to the details. So a little bit about tarot for those that don't know. There's a major arcana, which is where you find like the magician and the fool and hermit and things
The
like that. And
archetypes.
yes, the archetypes. And then you have the minor arcana, which is literally almost identical to a suit of playing cards. You have four different suits. Then you have an ace, you have queen, king. The only difference is you have a knight and a page, and you just have what is it, a jack and the playing cards. But it's really really similar otherwise. But each suit has its own specification that really helps like what it's talking about. So like cups are all about your emotions. And that one usually speaks to not just emotions, it speaks to vulnerability, it speaks to healing, it speaks to inner child work. Then you have the swords, and the swords are going to be all about the mind. It's going to be all about the thoughts, your narratives, the stories you're telling yourself, your perception. What lens are you viewing the situation out of? Because that's important. Sometimes your lens or your perception is way off, but that's just your experience. And now the invitation is, okay, I see that this is how you're seeing the situation. Feelings aren't right or wrong, but how can we shift it to a better perspective that's going to be more helpful and empowering than what you're at now? And then you have the pentacles or coins. And
Coins.
yeah, and though this one is very physical. Like you're gonna get, like, sometimes it's more money, sometimes it's projects, sometimes it's taking physical care of your body. But it's more like tangible stuff. And then the final one would be, oh my gosh, I'm like space
Rods.
rods or wands, thank you. And that one is like your passion, your creativity. I can't tell you how often I get
The
you need to
actions
play more.
cards.
Action,
Action
yep,
cards. Your
yep,
fire energy. It's the movement.
movement. And a lot of creative stuff comes from that one too. So like I get a lot of like, oh, you need to play more. Where's your play at? Where's your fun at? And that's very like wands energy, like, oh, I'm gonna go have a good time. I'm gonna be fiery and but each suit has its specialty. And I think that that helps too, is like when you see the wands, it's like, okay, there's creative, movable, like action taking energy. Or when you see the swords, you're like, oh yeah, I gotta go clean out my mind, I gotta figure out where I'm holding myself back. That's
Either I
a
need to
big
think
one.
more or I'm thinking too much.
Right. Depending, yep. But it's just really helpful. That's why I love it so much, because it just gets so to the nitty gritty. It's just like, this is what you need to focus on, and it gets so crystal clear for you. So it's just such a great tool, whether you see a reader or you do it yourself. It's a great way to really get super clear on yourself, on your where you're coming from, where you want to go, because the whole invitation is to help you get to a better place.
Right. And even if you see somebody in the beginning because you're unsure and you want hand holding, or you feel like you're wrong, you're not. But if you want confirmation on what you're doing, then go see a specialist. But this is absolutely a tool you can develop and work on yourself with. Like, you don't need to go see somebody else for validation because it's your inner work.
Yeah, no, 100%. I know that some people aren't, like, they're not interested in learning, so it's just easier to go see somebody too, which is totally fine. And you know what? Tarot might not be your tool if that's the case. Maybe angel cards, maybe the pendulum, maybe
Some other oracle.
some oracle. There's so many different kinds of modalities. There's even charm readings. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
I've seen that. I think that's so cool. Um, I met a woman who casts stones, right? not bones or anything, but like actual stones, and there's, you know, I mean, you know, runes, there's I
Yeah, there's so
so
many
many
different, and they
different
can be
things.
just as informational as the tarot or the oracle or angel cards, you know? So, I mean, I would just say too that if tarot isn't speaking to you, just get curious because there might be another tool or modality. And sometimes it's just meditating, and sometimes it's just getting in touch with your own self without the tools, you know, because they're just tools. You don't need them to get the information. You can also just do that on your own. Um, so
I think
yeah,
that when you're at the beginning of a healing journey and a learning journey, you do need the tools, right? And then once you get to mastery level, you don't, and that's the whole point. Like you go through all of that and you learn how to use all the tools, and then you by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, I didn't need them, and that's when you hit true mastery, right? Like when you're like,
yeah.
ah, I don't need that.
Yeah, the tools are very confirmative because a lot of the times, especially in the beginning, if you are getting an inkling on something, you're getting a knowing, but you don't trust it because society teaches us not to trust ourselves. That's just that little bit of thing that goes, okay, this out of all the 78 cards, this one is the one that came up. So, like when I was sharing my story in the very beginning, when I was leaving my ex-husband, and I didn't know what to do. I knew I needed to leave. Like ultimately, underneath everything, I knew that I couldn't stay, even though I was trying to find all the other ways I could. And so I did the simplest reading ever. It was, should I stay or should I go? And it was, you know, 3 cards if I stay and 3 cards if I go. And, you know, each of those lines had an outcome card. And the outcome, if I stayed, was the devil, which is talking about being caught in toxic patterns, things not getting better,
Yeah.
things no growth. It's just the merry-go-round of toxicity. And if I left,
Enslaved.
enslaved, yep. And if I left, I got the death card, which is all about new beginnings, closing chapters,
Transformation.
giving new ones, transformation. And so there's 78 cards in a deck. And of all the cards, for those two to be so blatant, but it was something that I already knew. I needed that bit of woo woo, I suppose, if you're going to put it that way. I needed that confirmation to
That in
trust
your
my.
face confirmation.
Yes, exactly. I needed that for myself to know that it was okay to proceed. And that was and so and it was the right, I mean, it's been a journey since that decision that I made, but it was the right one. And it was, and I knew, again, I knew it was the right decision. I just needed, because I was asking all my friends, my family, like, what should I do? And it was kind of split. I had a lot of friends and support that telling me to leave. And then I had other support and family like, well, you have a kid together and maybe you guys could try counseling, which we did and didn't work. But, you know, like there were the people who were trying to keep us together. And intuitively, I wasn't asking myself what I needed to do. And so the cards really allowed me to see what I already knew inside for me. And so that's the beauty of it.
Wonderful. Absolutely. All right. Well, Sarah, how can my audience find you?
Yeah, so my website is www.spiritjourneycollective.com. And it's kind of a mouthful, but it's all spelled out that way. And you can find me on Instagram at spirit_journey_collective. And those are probably the 2 most active places that I'm on. But I offer one-on-one sessions, 15-minute up to an hour. I offer email readings, which is like if you're too busy or you don't want to work with me directly, but you still want to ask the question and get, you know, get in touch with your own confirmation, all of that. Email readings are really great for that. And then I have a really new offering that, depending on when this comes out, hopefully this will be live, called the Alignment Project. And I'm super excited about this one because it's taking the readings that I give and really coming up with a tangible, actionable map with the client. So it's going to be like, we're going to look at what's coming through. We're going to come up with actionable steps together to help you get where you want to go. And I'm going to give you like a PDF of like everything we talked about. So you have something to come back and look at and the steps. I'm really excited about this because sometimes tarot, as much as I love how detailed it can sometimes still feel very abstract, especially for those that are very earthy and need that tangible, like, what do I do next energy? So this is going to give you that what to do next step. And so that's going to be also offered on my website as well.
Excellent. And I'll put the website in the show notes for you just so you can find her. I really appreciate you being on the show today, Sarah.
Thank you. And one more thing I forgot to mention is I also have my own podcast, which you were very recently a guest on, which is a great episode. I highly recommend you guys go check it out. But that's also called Spirit Journey Collective. I just decided to keep the name all the way through. It just makes it
It's
easy.
just easier to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as always, y'all know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go make all of your appointments for your routine stuff because